Hey, this is Mark Brody with Brohawk Solutions, and I hope everybody is having an amazing day today. I'm here with Kerry Childe, and Kerry and I are going to talk a little bit about privacy and security today. But before we start on that, Kerry, can you introduce yourself and tell people what you've been doing these days?
Nothing. I'm not doing anything. Um, Good afternoon. Happy Friday for those of you who know that it's Friday, and if not, happy whatever day it is for you. My name is Kerry Childe. I am a senior consultant with a company called Conturo. We do information governance and privacy consulting. I also am a trained attorney, and I have a law practice that I have on the side in order to provide legal advice and counsel to organizations looking for privacy and information governance legal advice.
Excellent,
And
excellent.
that's
It
pretty
sounds
much
like
everything
you're
I'm doing.
yeah, it sounds like you're probably staying pretty busy these days.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a little bit. So Carrie and I have known each other for a few years now, probably about a 10 or so. And she is definitely one of my go-to people anytime I have a privacy or security question. I'm calling Carrie, say, okay, correct me where I am wrong on this, and it's usually a pretty easy thing to do. So let's go ahead and dive in and just a few questions for you. So, Carrie, who is required to have a privacy and security program in place? What type of organizations, are required to have something like that in place?
Everybody.
Everybody.
Sincerely, like I wish that that were flip, and it's not.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I do this whole thing where I can do like the entire history of privacy in the United States from 1890 on, and that nobody needs that. So we're going to skip that right now. If you get particularly interested later, I'm happy to go through that. But the bottom right hand line of that is that every organization in the United States is covered by some sort of requirement regarding privacy and information security.
Okay.
Whether if you have a website that Californians can see, you have to have a privacy notice. That is an obligation. If you have a
Yep.
website that collects personal information of Californians, the website must contain a privacy notice.
Yeah.
The Federal Trade Commission requires that if you have a privacy notice that you follow it, and failure to follow it can be considered an unfair or deceptive act or practice.
Okay.
Um, Multiple states have passed, well, every state in the United States, including and all four territories, Guam, Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and DC, have passed state security breach notification laws, which require organization to provide notice to people if certain specific pieces of information have been the subject of a data breach.
Okay.
You've got multiple states working to pass data protection laws. California's California Consumer Privacy Act, the California Privacy Rights Act. Virginia just passed the Virginia Data Protection Compliance Act, DPCA, yes. Washington has tried to pass one 3 years in a row and it failed, but maybe not. It's still not clear. We have sincerely, we have a whole bunch of other states that are working to pass these things, all because the federal government cannot get one passed.
Okay.
And so the states are just sort of taking matters into their own hands and doing that whole, like, the state laboratory thing that is anticipated under the Constitution in the first place,
Mm-hmm.
to try to create some standards. So the short answer is yes. In the United States, if you are an organization with a website, you have to have a privacy program. If you are an organization that handles information, you need to have a security program. And then that's just the US. And then if you look at the rest of the world,
Yep.
it's much more explicit. Most other countries that have data protection regimes that looks very much like the European General Data Protection Regulation, which
Mm-hmm.
is much more explicit about having a privacy program, having a privacy officer, data protection person, having standards and practices in place, providing privacy and security by design and default, and all of these other things. So if your organization exists, it should have a program.
Okay. So what are some of the laws or the acts? I mean, you mentioned a few of them like GDPA and CCPA that
Right.
regulate privacy and security. And who has is it just the Federal Trade Commission that has enforcement authority, or are there other state or federal agencies that really
Yeah.
have that enforcement authority?
So in the US, so the US privacy regime is sectoral, which means that privacy at the federal level, anyway, is regulated by sector. So financial services has privacy requirements under Graham-Leach-Bliley and the Dodd-Frank and a bunch of other things. And so those regulators are the Federal Trade Commission, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and the federal functional financial regulators, the Federal Reserve, Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, et cetera, right?
Okay.
That's financial. Then you've
Hmm.
got healthcare, which is another sector that's heavily regulated. And in healthcare is covered by the Health Information Portability and Accountability Act. It's HIPAA, by the way. It's HIPAA, not HIPPA.
That always got me.
It drives me nuts.
Yes, it does.
So HIPAA, HIPAA, and high tech, and the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Civil Rights enforces the privacy requirements and the security requirements under HIPAA.
Okay.
At the state level, most of the time, the state agency that does regulation is going to be some part of the Attorney General's office, whether it's the Attorney General specifically, or the Attorney General's office may have some sort of consumer protection division. California, as part of the California Privacy Rights Act, has just created a privacy protection agency that
Hmm.
is the first of its kind in the country to be a state agency specifically set aside just for the regulation and enforcement of privacy requirements. But generally speaking, it's going to be the state AGs, and then at the federal level, you'll have the Federal Trade Commission, the Federal Communications Commission, sort of, the Health and Human Services, federal functional financial regulators, et cetera.
I remember
On
seeing a webinar that you did. Not to interrupt you there, Kerry,
Oh, go ahead.
but I remember seeing a webinar that you did a few months back where you were talking about CCPA and how CCPA was now going to be morphing into the CPRA. And it sounds like that legislation did pass in California, and yeah.
So yeah, that was interesting. The entire history of the CCPA is endlessly fascinating, and I'm very salty about it.
Yeah.
Um, the the CCPA came about because a real estate developer was in a conversation with a software developer.
Uh-huh.
Story differs as to which group, whether who he worked for. Most people say Google, some people say Facebook. It's unclear.
Yeah.
And the real estate developer was asking the software developer, something like, how much information do you really know about me? And was expecting so when you ask a pilot, how safe is it really to fly? And you get
Uh-huh.
20 minutes on how it's the safest form of travel ever, and
Uh-huh.
it's much safer than anything else. And like the history of airframes in the United States, right?
Uh-huh.
He was expecting that answer from the developer guy,
Uh-huh.
and what he got instead was, dude, if you only knew.
Yeah.
And this apparently freaked him out, and
Uh-huh.
so he wrote the California Consumer Privacy Act, and it's very clear that somebody who doesn't know how statutes work wrote this law.
Yeah.
And it was very bad. But it got implemented because he had created it as a state ballot initiative. And in California,
Hmm.
unless it's specifically written otherwise, a state ballot initiative, if passed, can only be amended by another state ballot initiative.
Mm.
And so if you're writing a very bad law and you have it, and it doesn't take very much to get it on the ballot, and
Yeah.
then it's not going to take very much to get people to vote for it, because who's going to vote against privacy?
Yep.
Then you've got a lot of problems. So the state legislature jumped in and said, listen, if we pass something that is very much like this, but we spell all the words correctly, right? Will you let us pass this law by statute rather than by ballot initiative? And he said, sure. And so they did. And it took 2 days total to get from please let us do this to the governor signed it.
Nice.
It was insane. So they got all of that done. And then in the process of doing that work, immediately after the governor signed it, there were a whole bunch of lobbying efforts basically by everyone across the board trying to get changes to this law so that it would work more like people were expecting. Now, in fairness, some of the changes were also because interest groups wanted to not have some of these requirements put on them, right? Like
Exactly.
I can't claim that this was all entirely altruistic, but in a lot of cases, the changes were in order to make it work more like other statutes did.
Makes sense.
And the real estate developer was very unhappy about this. And so he turned around and said, fine, I'm going to do this anyway, and created another ballot initiative called the California Privacy Rights Act, which was an attempt to address some of the issues that he hadn't been able to be addressed in the first statutory version, including the creation of this separate legislative entity, the separate regulatory entity, and some of these other things. And it was a ballot initiative. It does have the little provision in it that says that you can amend it by statute rather than by another ballot initiative. However, it says it can only enhance the privacy protections, which means it's like a ratchet that you can only tighten. So who knows? Who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah. I guess what I'm seeing is there's a lot of companies that are just continuing to do business as they always have.
Yep.
So how would one of the
because what else are you going to do?
Exactly. Well, I mean, how would one of those organizations start looking at okay, we have gaps in our privacy and security process. Where do we start looking for where those gaps are?
That's a fantastic question. I think if you're an organization that is sitting up and saying, if maybe we should be thinking about this, I think the first question you've got to ask is, what obligations do we have? What are the laws that apply to us? What are the laws that apply to our business? What are the contractual promises that we've already made? Right? What are the things that we've agreed to do?
Yep.
So you need to understand what your obligations are, and then you need to take a look at that, and you need to understand what your risks are, because your risk, if you are a small mom and pop bait shop, your risk is different than if you are a software developer who's selling software as a service, right? Like, those risks are not the same. And while it is true that a mom and pop bait shop probably needs to have some sort of data protection process in place, because my guess is they're not just taking cash, they're probably taking credit cards, right? So they've got to have something. It is much the requirements and the things that they need to think about are going to be wildly different than if you are Splunk, right? Or you're creating an app to find golf balls that have been left on the green that no one knows where they are.
You've seen my game then, huh?
So, right. So those things are different. And so you need to understand what your rules are, and you need to understand where your risks are. And then from there, you're much more able to sit back and say, okay, so privacy is about collection and use of personal information, right? And then information security is about how we protect whatever information we have, irrespective of whether it's personal information or not, right? So once you know what your rules are, and you know where your risks are, you can understand what kinds of information you have, and use that to identify where your risks and gaps exist. And then from there, you start to fill in the gaps.
There you go.
Generally speaking, we see that the gaps tend to be that people don't know what data they have, and they don't know where it is, right? So especially if you are, the mom and pop bait shop, probably not, because it's probably just mom and pop, right? And maybe junior. But if you're a software developer, you might have 100 people. And every single one of those people is doing something different, and they're all maintaining their email differently, and they're all working on Slack differently, and everybody's doing a bunch of different things. So you've got just enough people to make everything crazy. So people don't know where the companies don't know where the data is, and they don't know what they have, which creates risk in two ways. The first way is that in almost every country but the United States, but then also in California and Virginia, people have rights to contact an organization and say, tell me what you have about me.
Yeah.
And if you don't know where that is, then you can't answer that question, and that's a problem. So you have to, so there's that risk. There's also the risk that if you don't know what you have and you don't know where it is, the potential that some of that information might be something that triggers breach notification under whatever state breach notification law applies to you. It's much more likely that you won't know that you've had a breach, or if you do know you've had a breach, you have no way of knowing whose information was breached, which means you have to treat it like everyone's information was breached.
Yep.
And that's terrifying. So you got to know what you have. You have to know where it is. You have to know what rules apply to you. You have to know, what your risks are. And then you have to be able to respond to those issues. Somebody asking for their information, the potential that there's been a risk to your system, your infrastructure, and understand how you're going to protect those things going forward. So you have to have some sort of risk plan, right? Risk.
Some mitigation, yeah.
Risk mitigation, right?
Yep.
So if you get those pieces put together, that's the beginning stages. What's better is if you have someones who are helping to manage all of those things, so that your one person legal department isn't having to do all of your contracting, all of your compliance, and also all of your privacy and information security, because that's just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
So if you have someone's, whether it's the chief information security officer and a privacy person, or you've got an information governance person. I don't like it when information security and privacy are the same person, because they're totally different disciplines. But I also acknowledge that, businesses may not have the budget for 2 whole FTEs. Like, I get that. So if you have someone whose job is to think about how to protect the information, what's being collected, and how they're going to protect what gets collected, then you've got somebody who's focused on those specific things and is able to more easily flag issues. Like if you've got a salesperson who wants to sell customer information on the internet because it'll be cheaper that way, right? Like somebody who wants to think about these things in a data protection way, as opposed to how can we make more money because we're, our Series A funding is running out kind of way.
Yeah, makes sense. So, I mean, obviously, Kerry, you and I could sit here and talk for hours.
I could talk about this for days.
Yes.
Like, people have to tell me to stop, because I sincerely could talk about this for days.
This is something I know from personal experience, I know you're very passionate about, and I love seeing that. If someone's interested in expanding this conversation with you, how can they go ahead and get in contact with you, especially if they have questions about their privacy and security programs that they have or may not have in their organization? How can they contact you directly?
So there are 2 ways. Legal advice. Contourl is not a law firm, and so I cannot provide legal advice through them. Legal advice is klclaw@outlook.com.
Okay.
And Contourl, it provides a full suite of information governance, so records management, e-discovery, data placement strategy, data migration, all of that, full suite of those services, and also then privacy and information governance consulting, and that's Kchilde, KCHILDE @contourl.com.
Excellent. Are you also on LinkedIn?
I am totally on LinkedIn.
Excellent.
LinkedIn.com/in/Kerry Childe.
Excellent. All right, we've made it to the speed round, my friend.
Hey.
All right, so what is something that people would not expect to know about Kerry?
Everyone's always surprised when I tell them I was in the Air Force.
That surprised me the first time you told me.
See? Everyone's always surprised by that.
Yes. Yeah. That's a good one. So, you baseball fan, sports fan. I know you're more of a football fan.
Baseball.
Football and hockey.
Not so much. Yeah, football.
Oh. So what would be your walk-up or your theme song?
That is so funny. And the reason for that is this: I was at a conference a few years ago,
Uh-huh.
which was being hosted by a very well-known consulting organization. One of the big four, but I won't tell you which one.
Yep.
And the person who was the main partner for the conference had walk-up music.
Uh-huh.
And I have not stopped laughing about it to this day. And that was years ago, because who needs walk-up music? Privacy people do not need walk-up music. We do not need walk-up music. We do not need walk-up music. This is not.
Typically, you want to be in stealth mode.
This is not that big a deal. Privacy people do not need walk-up music. So I deliberately do not have walk-up music. I don't have walk-up music.
Do you not have walk-up music? All right. So, obviously, we all like we're all looking forward to being able to get back to old normal.
Yes.
So, where is your ideal off-the-grid location?
I am never off the grid.
Where would you go?
Never off the grid. That said, the places where I am most likely to be able to put my phone away and not worry about it are Central California.
Okay.
And on a train in Italy.
I like it.
Yeah, they don't. Italy trains are great. But the best place to sit is in the quiet car, where you can't answer your phone. So.
Yes. Oh, I like it. Kerry, thank you very much for taking part of your afternoon with me. A, it was great to catch up, and B, the conversation, about privacy and security. I know it's timely for everybody that's going to be watching this. It's something that we all have to pay attention to, because you just don't know what you don't know.
Exactly.
And so thank you again, and definitely look forward to catching up with you more. And again, anybody that's watching this, if you want to get a hold of Kerry, check her out on LinkedIn. I know she definitely will respond to her direct messages. Especially if you're saying, I need help, help me. So, all right. Thank you again, Kerry, and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks so much, Mark. You too.